the traditional lands of the Bidjigal. We pay our respects to Indigenous students, scholars and significant thought leaders from the past and present. We value the esteemed contemporary and traditional knowledges that Australian Indigenous peoples contribute to our academic excellence. We advocate for the positive impact of Indigenous knowledges founded within communities and culture across Australia. UNSW acknowledges our role in past injustices, and we are committed to honesty and truth-telling and justice. So thank you all for joining us here today. This, as I said, is our opening talk for the UNSW Strategy Expo, and it's actually part of a 4-day event series where we're going to offer a range of activities for staff and students to further engage with the ideas in development for the next UNSW Strategy, Progress for All. This opening talk is focused on the theme of incorporating Indigenous knowledges, which is embedded at the core of our societal impact framework. And if you've had a chance to go and look at the exhibits up the back, you'll see at the heart of our societal impact framework is incorporating Indigenous knowledges. So we obviously wanted to kick off this deep dive into these content areas with this topic today. We welcome Associate Professor Kevin Lowe, Gubbi Nation, Scientia Indigenous Research Fellow, School of Education, UNSW. He will be providing a talk on how to incorporate Indigenous knowledges. Kevin Lowe is a Gubbi man from southeast Queensland. He is a Scientia Indigenous Fellow at UNSW, working on a community and school-focused research project, developing a model of sustainable improvement in Aboriginal education. Kevin has had experience in education as a teacher, administrator and lecturer. He has expertise in working with Aboriginal community organisations on establishing Aboriginal language policy and school curriculum implementation. Recently, Kevin has worked with colleagues to review research across key areas of schooling and established the Aboriginal Voices, a broad-based holistic project which is developing a new pedagogic framework for teachers. After Kevin, we also warmly welcome UNSW Associate Professor Bernadette Hardy. Bernadette is a Gamilaroi and Darug spatial designer, transdisciplinary artist who explores how built environments can empower us to connect with each other and with country. Her methodologies, country sensing design and design relationality, bridge the natural and the more than human world with the built environment, inviting us to ask how we can create places that foster sensory connection, inclusion and belonging for all human life on the planet. Bernadette Hardy's talk is on designing with country. Indigenous knowledges have been fundamental to life in Australia for countless generations. They carry understandings of ancestral histories and exemplify beneficial behaviours for living well on country, managing environmental resources and maintaining social cohesion. By embedding it at the core of our framework, we demonstrate a significant commitment to incorporate Indigenous knowledges and to leadership and advocacy for Indigenous rights, aspiration, self-governance, education and community-led outcomes. We hope you will enjoy this talk, and I welcome to the stage Professor Kevin.
Is it turned off? Okay, can people hear me? Great. Thank you so much, Ferry, for that fantastic introduction and I guess to the commencement of this important strategy. And I must admit, I'm not probably the greatest advocate for participating in university things because I find my life is taken up with so many other things in my life. But this is one of the things that actually has really resonated with me in terms of the work that the university has done in terms of shifting its thinking and really placing Indigenous knowledges and experiences and traditions at the heart of what it's doing. So I really thank all of those who've done that work, Verity, and certainly a wonderful friend and colleague, Leanne Holt, who has been someone that I've known for a long time. Leanne, thank you so much for your ongoing support. As Verity said, I am going to talk to you about a project that I'm doing. And I guess hopefully you will see that while I don't necessarily reference directly the exact words of the strategy, I think that you'll see that everything that I've done and everything that's in here actually resonates and is imbued with the core principles of what the strategy is about. So I guess I'm trying to sort of, in a sense, give you some sense of how I go about doing this work and why it's important to me. I want to start with I guess a sort of like a location. And the one that really resonates with me, and the one I guess that really situates Sydney in a place so unlike every other city in Australia, in that it has hills. I should have done geography because I have a real sense of the spatial world, and it amazes me how flat the rest of Australia is in terms of the cityscape, apart from Sydney, which, as you know, goes up and down from beginning to end. And this photograph, which is one that I took some time ago, just reminds me, I guess, of the glorious Hawkesbury River, the Darubin River, the place, I guess, where probably the worst and the very first of the great massacres happened in the Sydney Basin. But look at the beauty of it, and look at the scenery, and look at the sort of the structure of it and the sense of place. It constantly amazes me, of course, the place that we work in. I too want to acknowledge country. And as it's right and proper, I'm just going to read this because I've written a book, but it's only a page. I want to pay my respects to elders, ancestors and the clans of the Dharawal and the Eora people, whose ancestors have lived extraordinary lives in and around the lands and the waterways on what I call today home. I acknowledge them all, their wisdom, their knowledge and custodianship of country, and the endless overlaid dreaming that fixes itself in this place, their country, with its land and waterways and skies. Today I bring greetings to you and others, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, alike from my people, the Gubbi people, whose lands bordered on those of the Yuggera and Turrbal peoples and the clans of the southeast Queensland, whose law extended over the coast and the hinterland from Bribie Island in the south to Fraser Island in the north and westwards to the Glasshouse Mountains. For generations, our forefathers and forebearers gave and protected the pristine condition of the environment and the territories with a deep sense of accountability, with a love and respect of the environment. They meticulously harvested resources, managed their country with respect, conducted controlled fires, curated a profound connection with the tangible and intangible aspects of the world they shared. Our rivers, which nourished these communities for over 60 millennia, remained untainted and unpolluted, while the land reciprocated with care and love. Now, as individuals, we should hold high expectations for our lives and work towards building a world and future that is worth living in for future generations. It is important to acknowledge and express gratitude towards the ancestors and elders who have guided and protected us, given me and others the strength and determination to be present in this moment. Together, we can create a new reality where truth and justice prevail, and our collective stories are valued and our voices are heard across this land. One could go on for an hour or two or three, really, in terms of talking about country and the importance of country. And I often think about it when I'm thinking about students at school, and particularly primary school students. And I think of all those teachers, I have two daughters, I have to admit, I have two daughters who are primary school teachers. And I often think about what they're teaching in the classes they teach. One teaches on the Central Coast and one's up on the Northern Beaches. And if there's one thing that I think that students in primary school, from the ages of 5 to the ages of 12, should really learn is this sense of country. If there's one thing that you really want them to know that would situate them in good stead for the rest of their life, is to understand that critical importance of what country is. It is that space which is all-encompassing. It is everything. It is everything that you will be, you're going to be, and you want to be. Everything that you relate to, the world, the physical world, the metaphysical world, is situated in country. You can imagine these people. These people are the Hawkesbury River. They're travelling through that river and being in that space. The thought of actually leaving that space is a total anathema. Unlike virtually everybody else who populated the world, Indigenous people did not need to invade other people. They did not. Why? Because everything that they were, everything they were ever going to be, was situated in country. When we do an acknowledgement of country or a welcome to country, you understand that what we're doing is in fact, protecting you for those who are welcoming you in the country. It's not just a welcome of how you go and come in and have a cup of tea. It's about the fact of protection, the deep protection that can only be given by somebody whose country this is. So these welcomes to country, which often are so almost profane in the way they're conducted in so many instances, are in fact unique articulations of people's place in country. You were nothing without country. You could be nobody without country. So the thought of going to somebody else's country and taking somebody else's country made absolutely no sense whatsoever, because you were a nobody in that country. So how do we start to teach this idea? Imagine trying to teach the the profound sense of that sense to students. And how do we work with teachers to actually do that work? That is the task that the Culturally Nourishing Schooling Project sets out to do. Profoundly change schooling right from the get-go in all of its efforts to actually help teachers move and shift to think about things very, very differently. The image that I just found it in a really old book, is actually the country that my family come from. The Gubbi people you can see on the red here, moving up just north of Brisbane, up along the coast, to the top end of Fraser Island. Beautiful, glorious country, and out to the Glasshouse Mountains. This project is about knowing Aboriginal people. As I said, I'm not going to sort of, in a sense, talk about Indigenous knowledges as a thing, although I can. But I'm hoping that you will see that what I'm talking about is that knowing Indigenous knowledges comes through the doing of work, of doing things with Aboriginal people in ways where elements of knowledges are given to you at the appropriate time when the community has trust in you to hand that knowledge over to you. So centrally, our project is about centering community aspirations for change. This is not a new thing. I have to fess up. I'm a father of 5 kids. I'm a grandfather of 7 granddaughters. It's supposed to be a very lucky man. So I'm constantly thinking about the next generation, constantly thinking about what that future is going to be like. And who gets to speak about that future, who gets to create it. This notion that what we're trying to work through is actually to listen to the voices of people who have had their tongues removed almost. The notion is that when we called the project Aboriginal Voices, it was called Aboriginal Voices for the very simple reason of wanting to bring those voices back on the table. They have been saying for generations what they thought was wrong with the education system, or more broadly about their lives in Australia. But people failed to listen, failed to understand. They heard the words, they could not make sense of them. So our project, Aboriginal Voices, was about re-listening to those voices, not re-prosecuting the same research. Our community's over that sort of research, that endless research of doing the same thing. They want progress. They want progress. So this project is about progress. It's about establishing productive research relationships with schools and communities to see how that really works and to see that you don't need to have a PhD to do this work. You do not. You just need to have a kind heart and common sense. And embedded, ethical and purposeful and collaborative programs. So in a sense, I've wrapped a whole bunch of big words in there, haven't I? But you know what I mean. Those words mean different things. In the common sense, I'm not trying to try to use some big words in a sense to make it seem as if it's something else. Ethical just means ethical behaviour. Purposeful means actually where things get done, real things get done. And collaboration is where, not how you feel when you walk away, but how do those you've talked to feel when you've walked away? Do they believe that you were trustworthy? Do they believe that you're actually going to be doing the right thing for them? So as I said, anyway, the Scientia project, which is really lovely, our symbol, which we had by one of our local artists, to in a sense try to represent the sort of the project that we're doing. It's about investigating new ways to provide equitable quality schooling. So I'm not about schools. I'm not about sort of in a sense thinking about schools. I'm thinking about the practice and process of schooling children. The practices of schooling children. So I'm looking at the structural issues and not being confused by the sort of stuff around the edges, the frippery that in the end often research goes to because it's easy work. Schooling, like anything, if I was talking about jails or I was talking about sort of incarceration, they're really big structural issues that takes time to understand. It's a complex diagram. I don't put it there because I'm not going to describe everything in it, but I want you to see that this project sets out from the beginning to be both holistic and conceptual across the entire parameters of education. It sets out to really understand, and things that we sort of said, these are the things that, you know what, I wrote this for me. These are the things that I wanted to understand. Even after 26 years, I spent 26 years as a classroom teacher. I spent 13 years working in government designing curriculum. And I thought, you know, after almost 40 odd years, I sort of knew stuff. But the reality is that, you know what my biggest fear was? I did not want to perpetuate the same thing that had been said to me over and again as a teacher. The principal goes away, is sort of always had a brain dump for a whole day. Kay come back and said, I've heard this fantastic speaker, we're going to change the world. And there's no buy-in from anybody. That sort of policy work and that sort of change work, you know, is probably populates the world, and yet it is so unimpactful. There's no buy-in. So these are things that we wanted to know about, in the sense, you see, I'm not sort of in a sense caught up in, am I going to improve literacy and numeracy? I'd like to. But you know what, after we did this massive investigation of all the research, we looked at 13,500 studies. So I think at the end of that, I probably had learned and read enough to get a sense of, I was looked at for two things. Can I see in any of those 13,500 studies any evidence of success? And you know what, how disappointing it was? I didn't find one example of sustainable success. Sustainable success. But what I did find was lots of evidence of really good practice. There are really good teachers out there. There are some amazing teachers who, for a short period of time, it's like being in a darkened room. If you turn all the lights down and pull down the blinds and we just had moments, flashes of light, that's what it's like in a school. Some person, you know, or a group of people get in and do some work, some really good work, and there's some really great results. But as soon as the funds are taken, as soon as the principal moves on, as soon as the teacher leaves, as soon as those critical people in the community who supported the project have left, the programs collapse because the structure work was never done. It was out of all that good practice that we developed the Culturally Nourishing Schooling Project. It was not just an invention out of my head. It was the sum total of 14 academics working day and night for 2.5 years, reading 13,500 studies to try to in the end elicit what good practice looked like. This diagram is the sum total of 2.5 years worth of work by 14 academics. People, you know what, I paid them nothing. I was working at Macquarie with Leanne. I had the sum total of $30,000 spent over 3 years as a postdoctoral fellow. I spent the whole lot on those 14 people, training them, working with them, giving them time off, giving them teacher relief so they could do the work that I could never do. And I found really good allies. There was only one other Aboriginal person. I found 12 really good non-academic, 12 non-Aboriginal academics who were prepared to work with me because they too wanted to know the answers to these questions. The 7 strategies, actually they started off as 5, but we've added 2 more when we realised just how important they were. But have a look at them. Learning from countries, situating teachers in a space and a place. Not just in the sense saying, oh, where are the boundaries? What's the boundaries of this country? Because that's how white fellas think. It's all about defence. Or what it says on my deed when I buy the property. No, in a sense, really understanding this notion of country. really questioning curriculum. I could go on for hours about curriculum. It is the most empowered policy document that controls so much of schooling, and yet it is so little understood as a sort of an area of critique. Professional conversations. We make teachers re-engage in actually reading and listening to what academics have said about the areas that they're working in and making them re-engage in the academic world. We've developed our own pedagogical framework, a framework that sits beside all of the sort of the disciplines, whether it's math, science, English, French, whatever, but actually talks about the in-between spaces. The in-between spaces that teachers have all the time to engage with kids. We understand that teachers need cultural support, not just cultural as in let's do a dance or sit down and eat which you grow up. I'm talking about in the sense, the deep sense of ideas, knowledges, views, beliefs, histories about the communities in which they come from. These are local people telling their stories. Although we understood that school leadership was important, we didn't have a strategy because we just didn't know how to do that work. But we've really understood now that school leadership is the key to break into the work. So it's really great that we've got so many leaders here because you guys drive, you facilitate it. You can't do it yourself. You may not have the knowledge yourself, but you facilitate others to do that work. You find people who can do the work and make it something that they can achieve. And the last one is about student voice. How extraordinary is it to ask kids about what they think about schools? Wow. Do you know what? Of all the things we do in schools, that's the one the Department of Education tries to make sure that we don't get much advice on. They don't want kids to be actually saying what good practice looks like in schools. That's the project. That's the work that I've been doing now for the last 4 years. Here's the diagram, which I think is really neat. And the diagram, I guess, in a sense, represents in one conceptualised image the holistic work that we do, and see that in the end, the work that we do, this central aspect here, is actually surrounded by the things that we need and we know actually make a huge difference. School leadership needs to facilitate teachers to do the sort of work that's necessary. We know that in the end, communities need to be given leadership, real leadership in the schooling of their children. It's extraordinary, isn't it, when we think about education? It's the only compulsory aspect of government where every parent is required by law to give their children to somebody else, often someone they don't know, to educate their child for up to 12 years. Now, in the end, there's a social contract between the state and the parent. I give you my child, you look after my child, you educate my child with a teacher, and my child has success. I think that's basically the contract, isn't it? We can virtually write that contract in 2 lines if we wrote it in plain English. So this notion of community leadership is about the fact of trying to enact that social contract at a local level. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The revolutionary thing in our project, so I don't know if Verity wants to put a hand over her ears, is that we're fomenting a revolution in communities around the development of micro-treaties. What does that mean? Micro-treaty to us is a total realignment between the power structures of families and communities and the kids in schools, whether it's a 5-year-old or a 17-year-old. It's about where families and communities are able to articulate the aspiration of what education should look like in that town. So this is not about the sort of the one-off, one-size-fits-all policy document. There's 10,400 schools in Australia. Potentially, there should be 10,000 different micro-treaties, of which, if we actually analyse them, so much of it would be similar. The aspirations. Aboriginal families tell me all the time, I want my kid to be happy at school. I want my kid to go to school and learn and have success. I want them to be happy. I want them respected. I want them seen in the school. They all say that. And then there's local stuff, which will be particular to the environment which they're in. Oh, okay. Oops. Is that?
practices.
I hear that.
And we know that we can't change the way education is done in these schools and in these communities if we don't harness our educational leaders in those school communities, because they're the ones making key decisions about school priorities, about school strategic planning, and about schooling budgets, which are really important. But importantly for culturally nourishing schooling, we take a really wide and inclusive view about what school leadership means. And so it's not just conventionally your principal and deputy principal or school executive leaders. School leaders in the Culturally Nourishing Schooling project crucially involve our Aboriginal cultural mentors, who are leaders in the context of the Culturally Nourishing Schooling project. And it's a way that we include community in leading in our project. Look, the ultimate goal of the Culturally Nourishing Schooling Leadership Hub is to support our communities to work towards agreements or micro-treaties with their communities. So we want our schools to think of new ways of doing schooling that work for positive outcomes for all their students, but their Aboriginal students and families in particular. And so the Leadership Hub is there to support our schools on their journey towards engaging in that micro-treaty work. That looks different in every school community, but there's some really kind of big visioning that we can do with our schools and our leaders to support them as they work towards micro-treaties. They're learning from each other and recognising that, you know, for all their differences of context, there's some similarities that they all share. Different schools in the CNS project are at different stages of the experience, and so we have schools that are a bit further down the track sharing their knowledge and insights. And CNX is contextualised in every school, and so what it means is there are differences that can be shared, different approaches that can be shared across schools, and you know, that sense of collective wisdom as well, that we're all going through a similar experience. They're all engaging in the culturally nourishing schooling strategy, so they have that commonality of purpose of all wanting that same outcome for themselves.
Oops. How good was that? So Claire is one of our researchers. She is a level B academic at Sydney University, but an extraordinary person in the field in terms of the work that she does. And she's the person who's going to take on our leadership project, but totally committed to the work that we're going to do. This work requires us we go out to the schools at least 10 days per year, and we have 8 schools. So there's 80 days of being away from the workplace, travelling backwards and forwards to do the work that we do. Some of the schools have as few as 180 kids in the school, and some of them have hundreds. One of the things that's really important in this project right early on was that we employed this extraordinary person who was our community facilitator. And first thing she said is, we can't do this work until we get upfront about developing a set of protocols about how we do this work and the importance of this work. This is the work we do at a school, in the playground, in our professional learning work, and in sort of the research we do. The whole lot needs to be covered by a set of protocols that actually lays out that connection of walking up to somebody and shaking their hand and making a relationship. And when you look at those things, there's nothing in anything, well, I would have never thought about that. You know, it's not like we've got two heads. We just want to be respected and listened to and have a place in the thinking about the work we do. We want to be acknowledged as being diverse peoples. There's over 500 language nations in this country. We're diverse. We have lots of similarities, but we're diverse. It's important to actually acknowledge and know about local knowledge holders, to work with them. Most times they're elders, but sometimes they're not. And so you have to actually learn by listening carefully to trusted people to how to navigate that. I like this one, guests. You need to be a guest on somebody else's country. You're always a guest in somebody else's country, even if you've been there 100 times. Being a guest means, in a sense, it's like a guest come into your house. They respect yours, what is yours, and don't do it in an appropriate way. Tread lightly. I love that term, treading lightly on somebody else's country. so you don't try to come in and infect and impact what's going on. Have and develop a strong sense of standards of engagement, how you do this work and how you meet with people. And develop ways of communicating and navigating the requests, the constant requests that you get, and making sure you understand that sometimes, even though it mightn't suit you, you need to give back. You need to reciprocate with things. If people are going to sit and talk to you, you need to give back to those people. It's a two-way relationship, not a one-way relationship. The project is, as I said, it's about, if in the end, all this work is about changing relationships between schools and communities. So if you saw that in the end, one of the big research questions we set for ourselves, we did not set the research question of we're going to improve literacy and numeracy. Our core question was, can we affect the foundational beliefs and values of teachers? Can you do that work? Thinking how hard that is. Why is it hard? Because research tells us over and over again, you can teach a dog new tricks as long as the trick is easy and doesn't question their core beliefs. If you ask someone to change their core beliefs and values, you're asking them to do the most difficult thing. So, were we able to change the fundamental beliefs that teachers have about kids? What do I mean by that? I mean, like the beliefs that teachers have about the fact that Aboriginal kids, they mightn't say they're more stupid, but they certainly believe that they're less motivated, that their parents don't necessarily have the same value for education, that communities who are more isolated, in a sense, don't know what success is. Therefore, you can see how it is. We're guarding, as teachers, we're putting a parameter around ourselves and saying, in the end, any success that the child gets is going to be because of me, but anything that holds a child back is because of them. Always. Always about someone else. Now, is that unique to teachers? Probably not. Probably not. But teaching is a unique profession in the fact that we are engaging with parents every day, whether or not physically, but certainly intellectually, we engage with them all the time. Those parents impact their children. So we need to actually sort of do some really hard work about changing people's beliefs. I'm not frightened to actually acknowledge that we're trying to change the education gap. And I'm going to give you a figure. I don't know. I wonder if Verity knows the answer to this question. Does anyone know how much has been spent in the Closing the Gap strategy? That's from 2008 to about 2022-23. How much money, specifically Indigenous identified resource, has been spent on Aboriginal education across Australia? Anyone got an idea? Anyone want to yell a figure at me? Come on, a figure. Not a figure eight, what is it? Yeah? 50 billion? Is that what you said? That's a good answer. Did you read my slides? $50 billion. $50 billion. How many Aboriginal kids are there in a school at the present moment? About 240,000 Aboriginal kids. You know what? Every one of those kids could be a multimillionaire and have bought themselves a really nice flat on the Gold Coast and probably drive a fancy car. Would they be better off? You would probably think maybe, because we have not done naught about closing the education gap. I wouldn't mind spending $50 billion if we actually moved that dial significantly. We could see sustainable progress. We have had no sustainable progress. $50 billion of taxpayers' funds. I wonder if all those people who voted against the referendum last year understood they'd be paying that much money forever and ever and ever until they get it right. It's interesting, isn't it? We do believe in the end that the answer, not the only answer, but a major answer is about the development and negotiation of these micro-treaties. Why do I say that? Because in the negotiation of those treaties, all of the questions about the history of the poor education in this country gets exposed. We're all familiar with the notion of catharsis. You know, that moment where you just have lanced that biggest boil that's ever been on your bum. You know, in the end, that moment when that release comes and you can actually see that there is another future. Micro-treaties is a process of catharsis. And in the end, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. as long as it's been done authentically and it's been done for a purpose to actually engage and fully empower Aboriginal families and communities to be part of the process of education, that's the process of Lansing and Boyle. You will hear the history of education for the last 100 years play it out in front of you. What's happened to every mum and dad, every grandparent, every great uncle, even the ones who have long passed, about the refusal of those students to be able to access schooling. I'm going to put this here for, if nobody else, Leanne, because I really appreciate that this university has picked up the notion of micro-treaties and really is trying to shift the dial in terms of that relationship, Leanne. And I really applaud you and your team for doing that work. I'll share the slide we've done. It's okay, I'll share it with you. But micro-treaties is about the fact, as I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It needs to be absolutely unique to each location. Whether it's a treaty or something else, like, in a sense, I'm not going to get hung up on the fact that it's called, I like calling it a treaty because I like it really irks some people. But I understand in the end that we need to also play politicians. I understand very so. I'll try to be a politician. But it is about, in fact, really understanding what this is actually about. It's about this process. What we think are some of the principles that we really think should fit underneath this process. Have a look. It's about developing a joint vision. It's about schools acknowledging an Aboriginal community's experience across generations. So unlike, the John Howard view of the world, well, I didn't do it, so therefore I'm not responsible. This is the hard thing, because we're asking principals and schools to sit and listen to a history which often is a history that's long gone in terms of those people. None of those people in our school were there 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. But that's the history that in fact impacts on what is now structural resistance. Structural resistance by parents who, in the end, understand that education is important, but understand more that what schooling does to their kids is more violent than not getting an education. How's that? Think about that, the extraordinary notion of that you're giving up your kid's right to an education because in the end, what's happened to your child, the denial of Aboriginal identity, is more important or more a consequence than actually not being educated. The impact depends on the journey. So it's all about the journey. It's a process, isn't it? We all understand that. It's a process of falling in love is more important than the end point of it. It's actually learning about this person, this group, these people you are going to engage with. That's in the end what love is. It's the sum total of all of those experiences. Yeah, that's what I think anyway. It's about, understanding, being respectful and productive and building a long-term relationship. So we're expecting, hoping, that schools will go into these processes knowing at the end that the principals who are there now are not the ones who are going to be enacting it in 5 or 10 years' time. Like one of these schools we're in has had 5 principals in 4 years. 5 principals in 4 years. But somehow or other, every principal who walks in that door is responsible for what happens in that school. We need to tie them to it. I know some people say, oh, how can you tie these teachers down to this sort of stuff? They weren't party to the negotiations. Well, a bit like, in the end, we had one treaty at the end of World War I, another one at the end of World War II, right? And it was, in a sense, universalised. And that drew a line and said, we're going to move on from this point. We don't go back and re-prosecute that again. Let's actually re-prosecute the terms and conditions of the ending of World War I or II. This is what we want. We want to be able to move forward in the knowledge that what we've said and told schools and governments actually is enacted. And it is about an agreement that ensures the continuation of the partnership into the future. So, we're not trying to hold a school principal to the terms of the conditions. We're holding the school system to those terms and conditions. Principals can go. They do go. I understand. There's very few people who can go and live in Galaganbone or in, out of Whoop Whoop for too long, unless you live there. The days when people went and stayed and really committed to those locations, that's long gone. The days when doctors went to a country town and stayed their whole life there, that's gone. But while they are there, they're responsible for what happens under their name and the institutions that they work in. So in the end, second last slide, I know. You're just learning, there's something about Kevin Lowe is that I can't stop talking. These are the things that we think are really important in terms of the program itself. In the end, even though we do really hard yakka work, talking about curriculum and teaching practice, things like that, the whole thing, the success of it, is built on trust. And I've left a page on most of the chairs. If you don't get it, come and get one. Because you're going to say to me, well, have you had any success? And if you look at one of those pages, it actually gives you a whole bunch of things of what our research says are the successful outcomes to the project. We've had bucket loads, but I don't want to focus on it because I think in the end you want to hear about, in fact, is what's more important than that success or what that success is built on is these things. These are the important things. So have a look at them. So we built a program that establishes the project around centering families and communities. We're about employing cultural mentors. Why? Because schools are ignorant about Indigenous people's cultural aspirations. The hardest thing, and we just really haven't cracked this nut yet, and yet the thing that probably makes the biggest impact in schools, if a school could establish an Aboriginal languages program and establish, whether it's a dance group, an art group, whatever, and be consistent in supporting it over the long term, you would have the kids in the door every day. We interviewed kids in Plumpton. So people know where Plumpton is? It's out in the far western suburbs. There's 190 Aboriginal kids at that school. Western suburbs of Sydney is the biggest population of Aboriginal people in Australia. The kids, they wanted to tell me all about this dance program that was actually being run by an Aboriginal primary school teacher in a high school who was employed as an AEO in a school, and she was teaching the girls dance. She was teaching them the dances of her community. She was from the Torres Strait, and she said she had to get advice and support, but the women in that community said any sort of cultural dance would be fantastic because we just don't have that knowledge. Please do. And so she taught them. While she was teaching them dance, so they got the moves right. They were young girls always get the moves. My granddaughters never stopped dancing. But the point is that she was talking to those kids about culture. Why do we do this dance? When do we do this dance? Who does this dance? Who needs to initiate this dance? What's the dance about? All that sort of stuff is just, in a sense, you pick up along the way when it's part of your culture. And these girls were just saying, I come to school every Wednesday, because Wednesday afternoon I go to the dance group. And then they talked about later on that there was this young boy, he was a strap on it, Aboriginal kid, 6 foot, skinny as, he got in the dance group. They conned him into the dance group. That was a great boost for them. They realised that he was somebody who would actually open up the doors to all the boys as well. How important it is. Identity is critical. And that was a bit of a yarn, sorry about that. Working closely with Aboriginal families and staff is really important, bringing everybody into the tent. One of the things we do as researchers is that we actually, all our cultural mentors, so every school has a cultural mentor. Our cultural mentors, we offer them the opportunity to be co-authors in all our papers. They read our papers, we pay them an honorarium, hear that? Not a salary, an honorarium to read and see in our ethics application. It's all been approved. So they read the papers. They give us advice on the papers. They provide us feedback on the papers and they go on as co-authors on the papers. And we also build key relationships with key organisations. So one of our greatest supporters is the AECG. And so the state AECG, with Aboriginal Education Consultative Group, is now going to move forward on our micro-treaties and run the micro-treaty project and co-design with us to work with these 3,000 schools in New South Wales to actually start developing micro-treaties right across New South Wales. They see it as a way of being able to break the nexus of the power of the Department of Education, which foisted on them a policy document, school community partnership document. It was signed and then got lost in the schools. Nobody ever initiated it. They want to initiate that at the local level. So that's, in a sense, the impact of the work is that a peak organisation see the power of the work we're doing and see it as a real way of being able to really shift the dial. Last slide. What have we learnt? What we've learnt apart from all the other research work which you can read, is about the power of building programs that initiate Indigenous knowledges right up front. That this work is totally dependent on trust. We do, in fact, really create the opportunities for new knowledges to be created. I mean, if you're into that sort of stuff, and Martin Nacker's work on cultural interface, this is the cultural interface at work. This is where that sort of work happens every day. We really, in a sense, have really done a lot to affect our own standpoint as researchers, who we are when we go into other places, the power and authority we have to do that work, and the reliance that our communities have on us to help do that work. I make no bones about the fact that our project is absolutely built on doing the best quality research I can do. It's not about doing poor quality research. We have to ask ourselves really hard questions, collect oodles of data, spend a gazillion hours on analysing it and publishing it in the best journals we can. Because you know why? After reading those 13,500 studies, basically half of them need to be burnt. In the end, we want to replace that body of research with a set of research which is designed and developed by Indigenous ideas and communities, and to replace that with really good quality research that shows how it can be done. And this is not about dissing teachers. As I said, I was a teacher for 26 years. I'm married to a teacher. I've got 2 daughters that are teachers. I love teachers. But the fact is that teachers have had both hands tied behind their back for way too long. And they're given poor resources in terms of policy work. So we've got a lot of work here to do at university in terms of the teaching that we do in our initial teacher education programs. So there's a lot of work we need to do in that space. And the other 42 universities in Australia who also graduate teachers. So the work here at New South Wales University needs to infect every other university in terms of this work. And it is about, in the end, I couldn't quite work out how to write the last line, but it is about supporting community empowerment in the sense of communities being given the capacity to really see success. So at that point, I'm going to thank you so much. I think the next slide, I think I've given you, if you'll see that if you've got the card, that's the QR code. You can look at the website and get all the details you want. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that, Kevin. We now have Bernadette, who's going to come up and speak to us about her research. And I'm very appreciative of everybody's patience and time. Thank you, Bernadette.
Thank you. Hello. I don't particularly like public speaking, but I'm here because I think it's, I guess the social impact framework was something that was one of the first times I'd seen a document that allowed me to be all of myself, or perhaps there was an opportunity for me and my community to be all parts of us. And I went for a walk and had a coffee with Verity, and she invited me here. So I'm deeply appreciative of making space. And I'm just going to jump into it. So there's been a number of acknowledgements to country today, or rememberings of country. And thank you so much for your acknowledgement of country and your beautiful work that you're doing. I'm a person that's a descendant of what's now known as Sydney. I am from the first stolen generation that was put into the native institution in Parramatta, and my ancestor here, Kitty, who I've drawn, remained, that's my artist interpretation of her, and I'm not an artist, but I'd like to welcome her here because she speaks through me. Up until this photo here, she was on a list that looks like this. And I've zoomed in on it here as she's number 2. And that marking matrix that we as people know at school, I know all too well, being a Darug and Gamilaraay woman, often measures us on how well we can read and write, but fails to see, especially at this time after she was stolen and placed into the institution, from the river in which she knew so well, the Boromadigal River, that she already had the ability to read and write well in her own way, It only measures how we can read and write in English, and perhaps in many letters that are written become a supreme human being in the colony. So I'd like to pay my respects because up until recently, Kitty was only visible on a list, and through the help of the descendant that is number 1 there, Maria Locke, my Auntie Leanne Tobin, who is the descendant, these 2 little girls were 5 and 6 when they were placed into the institution together. And Auntie Leanne is my cultural knowledge. She shares cultural knowledge with me. She teaches me art, even though I'm not an artist. And she's recently helped me. So you can imagine those 2 little girls in the native institution together, scared, 5 and 6. And she's done the first painting of Maria Locke, that little 6-year-old. And I've done the first painting of Kitty as a child and then as a woman. And this picture now sits in the library of my children's school, where my father went to school before becoming a ward of the state, when my grandmother went to detention not far from here. So you can imagine for me to come back here and be able to speak to you is overwhelming in many ways, but also we get the opportunity to have a sense of self-determination when we speak and share, and we get invited for coffee and people hear us and see us. So when I speak about country, I tried really hard in COVID to articulate what country meant in the built environment. It's now a mandated process and now a part of the built environment curriculum. And all of these elements in here in a diagram are all of the elements that we have to consider when we are designing with country. And I'll just jump out on, because often I'm, asked my pronouns and I might not get all my spelling right, so bear with me. But sometimes I say that I am country, or sometimes I feel like a body of water. Maybe I'm not a human, I'm not sure. But I'm a mother to 3 beautiful children and 1 dreaming. I'm a Darug and Gamilaraay custodian. I'm a woman that lives with autistic culture. As Scott Avery puts it, culture is inclusion, and it's my identity and not my disability. My children are autistic and my husband's autistic. I'm a spatial designer and I'm associate professor here at the Built Environment, and I run a small design studio called Hardy Hardy. And so all of these things are who I am. And sometimes we call it our standpoint. I'm doing a PhD that is in the very final stretch of its 5 years, and it's about turning the lens around and looking at autistic culture and how built environments often disable us, and perhaps there's another way of understanding what autistic culture might mean. And so when we look at kinship, or I do a lot of drawing and to try and explain myself, or to try and explain the beautiful autistic people in my research, and we talk about kinship and this interconnectedness of this red river gum connecting down to the water. You'll see that the water is also a face. You'll see that the person can speak when they're connected to water, connected to the 7 sisters in the sky, and there's no disconnect between the person and the kinship and the connectedness. And sometimes I get put into these kind of brackets of who I am, and they're all sort of separate. And that's one of the hardest parts of all, is that, are you an autistic person? Are you an Indigenous person? Are you a designer? And when I tell people all those things and a body of water, they kind of freak out a little bit. But it's sort of, where can I be all parts of me? And I think in the social impact framework, there's that possibility where I get to be all parts of me. And when I say me, I mean my community. I don't just mean me, I mean country. And then, if you start to separate me, this is the impact of how it starts to make me feel, the disconnect from the water, or the disconnect, I might not be able to speak or see. I might not be able to express myself, and I sort of begin to mask and become this other form. And I'm a very reluctant academic, but perhaps if I'm here, other people will be able to be here too and feel that they can be themselves. But this picture here was the reason I decided to take on a PhD. My son had passed away at the time, and I had a little autistic girl trying to go to school, and I was raising my twin, the surviving twin of our twins. And I went to the school, and finally we had this kind of calm corner that everyone had been advocating for when we finally got Emma to enter the built environment and actually be able to be part of the classroom, which was such a success, and she'd spent many years trying to build her capacity to join the community. This was what the calm corner looked like. And being a designer of the built environment, I didn't really think that was good enough. It's sort of, I look at it and I don't see calm. And I felt like Ren and Stimpy, you know, when the eyes kind of pop out of your head, and I was like, okay, something's got to be done about this. And so 5 years later, here I am. And I'm not going to show this video, although I think it's important. I'll post it later. It sort of talks about ICIP, which I think is a really important topic that we kind of brush over in the built environment or the creative environment. But it stands for Indigenous Cultural Intellectual Property, and it's about us not knowing that we can own all the information that we teach and share, and that mostly it belongs to country. But in the work that I'm committed to doing, the values of Yanama, Bangarora, Burji, Gumada, which means to walk with good spirit, or the Gamilaraay concept of Balawa sort of guide what I do, and it means to go slowly, respectfully and thoughtfully so that no one's left behind. And when I looked at the social impact sort of focus areas, which, you know, are here, accelerating the transition into a sustainable society, enabling healthy lives, advancing societal prosperity. Sorry, I've put in enable healthy lives twice, but maybe that's important. And fostering societal resilience, security and cohesion. And I think what you spoke about a lot was trust. And we say that the process happens at the speed of trust. And I think, you know, if you're trying to build a relationship with an autistic or a connected person, we know when we feel safe and we know when we feel connected, and our process and our ability to enter the built environment or to learn will happen when we feel that we've got that connection or trust. So there's a little white card that's sitting on your chair. You can fill it out or you don't have to, but I use them as protocols when I teach. They mean the Sydney word for hello, in the oldest hello in the world still being used on these lands today, on Darug lands, is Warami, and it's how I start every class. It's how I start every introduction to anyone, and it always means like I can see you've come from far, or why are we here? And generally you would use that protocol when you entered a built space, and you would always say Warami, or not, sorry, on country, and you would wait until you were welcomed into country, not so that you can sit up in front of the CEOs or the teachers or the principal's office and get into trouble, but so that you were safe and so that you knew and so that you were connected to country, and so that country was welcoming you in, and you were never alone when you walked in. And the beautiful thing about these sorts of little cards that people hand in is you get to build a relationship quite quickly with the people that are with you. And you might say, I've come from deep time, like you might talk about, you know, when you might have not been a human in another life, or you might talk about where you've come from that day, but it's your opportunity to sort of engage. And I provide that opportunity to you to say, like, why are you here? Where have you come? What country have you come from? What water, what river have you come from today? Have you travelled along the Dirrabin? Have you travelled along the Parramatta, the Burramadigal? Have you gone along the Georges? Like, why are you here? And letting country know that you're there. There's my typo. But anyway, and I think this process of Warami gives us the capacity to not only form a connection, like when you go to China, is it ni hao to say hello? Or, you know, when you go to Aotearoa, kia ora. In Sydney is Warami. That's how we say hello. It means it's a connection between human, non-human and more than human. And when you're looking at really tangible ways of developing programs or schooling programs, if everybody starts the day with Warami, you can say Budjeri, which means good, or you can say Budjeri, which means not so good. Or Budjeri might mean like I'm really good. But, you know, these really basic language protocols are how I start every class or every interaction. I talk to country about it. I've been cleaning out waterholes for some time, and it might look glamorous, but when I started, it certainly wasn't. And it just gives you an understanding of the layers of knowledge. That's my daughter and Auntie Deb, and the waterhole that we often speak to and clean out. And I ask that waterhole for guidance in everything that I do. And I speak to the animals, the birds, the flora, the fauna, the moon with that simple word of Warami. And And when we do it, we're sort of seeking informed and continuing consent. I think it's more important that obviously free, prior and informed consent is important, but that continuing reciprocity is really important for us. And every time I go back to that waterhole and clean it out, it's like that schooling, that caring, that belonging, that connecting, it's a verb. And as Bell Hooks said, love is a verb. I think she said that. And on the left-hand side, most people have probably seen this diagram. It's got the human at the top, and it kind of controls the narrative or the way of being, and country-centric ways is sort of more secular or together, as there's not a human at the top but one working with all. And when I decided to do an ethics process, which was really quite tricky for me, the moon has played a really big role in my life, in the role of fertility, in the relationship between my twin being here and not here, and the importance of free, prior and informed consent from the moon. You can imagine the ethics committee when I said I have to gain free, prior and informed and continuing consent from the moon. It's played a really beautiful role in my life and continues to, and has given me things that I never could have dreamed of, being able to understand the way in which the fertility cycles move, the way in which the beautiful birds make more noise in the last supermoon that we've had. It's just endlessly giving. And I know a couple of little autistic fellas that get very scared at the end of the day when the routines start to change. And when we build a relationship with the moon, all of those routine changes become less rigid because there's a connection with our grandmother that never changes. And when we talk about advancing social prosperity, it sort of takes me a while to unpack those sorts of terms. And I think that the ecology and the belonging and the prosperity, when you have those things, they will lead to that economic prosperity. And you're grounding your non-human and human methodologies in the oldest kinship systems that have existed and are still living. So it's a big change, like you spoke about, but it's also a proven method of commitment that is ongoing. And again, that advancement happens at the speed of trust and connectedness. So it's like the Olympic torch. You know, you kind of, the flame never really goes out. Imagine if the Olympic torch flame went out, it would be, you know, a ruckus. So with us, it's like that reciprocity of never putting that torch down and that flame down. And we know very quickly when people put that sort of flame out. And for us, that Little Prince, you know, that little book that we read at home, you become responsible for what you tame. And so when you start to engage in these kinship systems, we want that flame to keep going. And there's another typo. It needs to be grounded in relationality and belonging and place, like you were speaking about, this macro-micro type analogy. And I just wanted to show sort of how I do it. I'm here one day a week. I don't have a huge amount of time. I've got, you know, young children, PhD, husband, family, community commitments, custodianship. And the way in which I've been able to, over the last few years, I guess, get some things that I'm really proud of, seeing most of our diverse international students or cohort of diversity, how none of my students, there's probably one who's Aboriginal, so most of my students, teaching them something like this in a short period of time is quite a challenge. And I'm a person that really believes in belonging. So sometimes I take them back to Gondwana. I take them back to like a really, really, really long time ago when we were a supercontinent. And sometimes we'll hear crows or we'll see dragonflies in our course, and we'll talk about how much knowledge they still hold being here. We'll talk about megafauna. We'll talk about, 30,000 years to put it in the context of time, how we had giant wombats alongside us, so having to live in harmony was very important because they were very, very big. And then we sort of, Natasha, thank you for being here, because this comes back to the class that you asked me. She took me out for dinner and said, do you want to teach history? And I was like, I'm not really a history buff, but she sort of explained that I was in history, and maybe it would be good for me to speak about. So thank you for that confidence boost of doing that. And so that then led me to sort of going back and looking at, well, we start design with ancient Greece and Rome, and that's where students start learning about design. And so then I started kind of drafting what happened before then and putting that into the context of students learning. And, you know, going sort of back to some of the incredible things that happened in India 100,000 years ago, or in China, and then starting to see people's, you know, belonging come out in their understanding of deep time. And then sort of, this is going to be expanded on, but this was a draft of where we started. And you know, landscape architecture, we walked around and got to know some of the elders on campus. Often people are trying to connect with our human elders, but sometimes there are non-human elders who are here first, and we should be showing them the respect that they deserve. And when you see these giant figs on campus, you'll see that they've created their own support structures where their arms kind of come out and then grow back into the ground, and you'll feel a sense of coolness in the summer. And it becomes the teacher. I think I just become a portal to it. And so I've sort of had that dream that maybe the course convener one day will be the fig, and I'll just give, you know, life to it, or it will. So then this is Sarah and I, sort of, she sat with me and said, how can I help you achieve self-determination in landscape architecture? And I'd never had anyone ask me that before. So I said, well, the subject landscape analysis hasn't been edited or changed in any huge way in the last 30 years. So rather than analysing the landscape, why don't we remember it and analyse it, you know, together? So we're not just analysing it, but we're actually remembering it. So going through the history of what the campus looked like, the marshlands down here, if you look outside, all of this was kind of sand dunes, marshland, wetland birds, going down to the topography so we sort of counter map the campus. And then when you go outside, there's no water, and we sort of quiz, where does the water go? Like, where has it been? And we see things like the Gymea lily shooting up, knowing that the whale's kind of travelling through at certain periods. And so every single moon cycle or day, country becomes the teacher. And it's a wonderful resource because it doesn't cost anything. And we always got no money, you know, like we need time, money and things to help us. And so country is this eternal sort of author or designer or teacher that never stops kind of giving. And then we kind of go, well, where has the water gone? And we go and find it. And it's down behind NIDA. And then we can see on this particular day with the landscape architecture students that the turtles were trying to make their way upstream to sort of get back to Centennial Park. And, you know, they hold our law. You can do it, buddy. And the students are kind of like, oh, wow, look, there's a turtle there. And they start analysing the moss on its back, how long it's been there. And I you know, we have a deep sort of opportunity to sort of care for them. So we go through the process of, well, we can't get in because there's a fence, and it's not uncommon to not be able to do this type of work, but then taking them down further to where the stormwater drains that have been channeled kind of end up, and down at the sort of Mills Ponds down at near the Botany golf course, and seeing all the paper barks of which you can really get a sense of what this place was like further downstream. And just that, this is another in the interior architecture with Eva Lloyd, students taking them down and spending time designing with country, getting to know country, going through this sort of process of, you know, white ochre that would be put onto your skin before you travelled into country, and really getting a chance to kind of get to know one another. And little beautiful things like this happen where this dog called Frank kind of came along through the middle of it and licked the sun. But you see sort of people really engaging in something that they haven't done before, and the teacher notes and the student notes, they sort of all become part of this way of working that's not separate to everything else. And we keep it going, and then we go to... I've deliberately put this one in here, and it might be a little bit unsettling for some. This is the same walk at sunset, and then we go and eat together. So you can hear that sort of person in the background heckling. That's not uncommon for us when we're doing our cultural practices. You know, all the students are we're trying to bring how does fire relate to their culture in so that everyone's got this sense of belonging, and then people are kind of heckling us in the background. And I think it's important to bring that in, not because I want to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but because being the only Aboriginal people in a room sometimes, that colonial load, some people say cultural load, is significant. And we just kind of raise our voices and hold our heads higher, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't it's one of those things that I think we have to work on as a community, knowing that we are the minority groups that are sometimes going into spaces. And I put that in there deliberately because it sort of sat in my memory as being, important to learn from. And this is my father here, and we talked about protocols before. And so the next thing we ask the students to do is really establish their own protocols with often around water. And the protocols that have been handed down to me, I don't get to change, but my dad has been working with architects and designers my whole life. I grew up in the workshop, so I've been in this industry my whole life, and being able to come here and really work with students on, people starting very early on in their career to bring user groups that are non-human and are about regeneration, are about interconnectedness, inclusivity, and the sun as an active participant and the birds as active participants is a really rewarding experience very quickly. So we take our classroom outside and we talk about what active participants are in, rather than analysing them online. Today is very windy, so the wind would play an active role in having a place in our classroom and might even bring us closer together because it's naturally windy. And Mackenzie here, who's just sort of finished off an amazing internship with Renzo Piano, I was told that her Designing with Country portfolio will work in the architecture section of her master's, helped her get that position. So I was deeply proud and have kind of watched her journey and her engagement recently even on social media, because she's done a Mackenzie in Italy, so we can follow her. And, this was the first time it had been taught ever. And certainly from a person who's not only from here culturally, but also a designer, I was deeply quite emotional at seeing country become so immersed in everybody's work. And her protocols were, to be born from country, healing through the analysis of many interrelated symbiotic relationships. This is kind of done in like a 12-week period. And then the other one was about education and humility, and looking at the built environment and really trying to bring non-human voices and sustainability into her process. And lots of students did beautiful work. This is just one example. And then, when she read out her love letter to country, you can imagine it was quite an emotional experience for me. I had to kind of, maybe my top lip was quivering a little bit, but it was very special for somebody to write a love letter back to country as part of her sort of course outcome. And she said, "Today marks a pivotal moment in our lifetime as architects, as Australians, as daughters, sons and people, as beings living with country. Our journey of unlearning and relearning began just 12 weeks ago. During this time, we have designed and created future imaginings in collaboration with her, as in country. She has been our teacher, our counsellor, our colleague and our friend, showing us how to design with country. Today we make a vow to her to design without appropriation, to support and serve her with reverence, to challenge colonial prejudice, to be courageous and give her the voice she deserves in a time when the human voices appear to be louder than ever. She is our past, our present and our future, and she is us and we are her." And so I've tried to kind of cross-map it, but some of the other feedback has been the introduction of country added a new lens that became inspiring to design with, and added new experiences that I'll take on. I really enjoyed caring for country theme in this course and wish that this was something we incorporated from the beginning. I love that we have had the chance to talk and be guided by an Indigenous representative, which personally helped me a lot to be more confident with the project I'm doing. And I feel a sense of belonging to the campus that I didn't have before. And I really enjoyed walking through country and learning through an Indigenous perspective. It has helped me create a deeper sense of consciousness in my work. I don't particularly like reading out compliments that include my name, but I really appreciated the attention and time given to Indigenous ways of living and thinking. The perspectives brought on by B were especially important, and I found them incredibly helpful in learning to analyse and remember the landscape. And then this one really meant something. I would like to go back to my country now and care for the wetlands. I feel like I understand the purpose of design more. And this one was particularly special when a student said, I went back to where my dad taught me to ride my bike growing up, and I realised the trees there still knew me and I wasn't alone. So I guess the kind of dream for me, as in country, is to sort of have that as a foundational built environment opportunity to design with country, but where all disciplines come together. So if you're doing landscape, interiors, even construction, industrial design, that you get the chance to really understand. And sometimes we look quite far for projects, but actually the campus itself is a wonderful teacher. And just in closing, it just sort of wanted to show what's sort of happening on my country at the moment. Southwest Sydney, which you mentioned, is getting an airport, which is important. It doesn't mean it's not important, but just to give you the sort of, I guess, the realities of our kinships. I'm from a clan group known as Ganamagal, which is Prospect, which is a high point and a massacre site. Unfortunately, that's why Kitty ended up in the institution. And our sounds of the Cumberland Plain woodland are very, very important and very unique to anywhere in the world. And when it sort of gets flattened like this, how do we really make sure that whatever we're planting or doing, we're trying to give an active voice? Because as Sydney starts to sprawl in a housing crisis, the impact we feel is substantial. So kind of in closing, I just put this little video in of, which my friend helped me put together, of what the river system kind of looks like at the moment. This is the only place where we can still get access to the sacred river. It looks very fancy from there, but it's very sick, actually. And I think, you know, if you get the chance to kind of plant anything, why not plant the Cumberland Plain woodland and try and get its seeds of its children and grow that ecology back? And it's not uncommon that in my dad's factory complex in Wetherill Park that you now see these little fellas either not living or in the car park because they've got nowhere to go. So it's sort of a call out, I guess, in social impact. Sometimes it's not just about humans, but our non-humans and our more than humans need us more than ever to create a sense of belonging for them too. So thank you.